I wouldn't have changed my life for anything because that was so interesting living in lighthouses in such variety.
Every time we look at that big red, we have a lovely photograph of it at home, and that's one of the best and beautiful lighthouses I've ever seen.
When tourists say, now why do you suppose people are so interested in lighthouses now? I say, well, lighthouses are in vogue.
The lighthouse service saved literally thousands of lives by, one, providing a beacon of navigation for the tremendous range of maritime commerce that was being conducted in the Great Lakes region. It was very important for someone to be a keeper, that is, to care for the station, to care for the lens, to keep it operational, because these beacons quite literally saved lives. Without the lighthouses, these vessels would have been driven aground or driven up onto shore or hit unmarked obstructions out in the lakes. So there are countless lives that they've saved over time. Lightkeepers themselves were even sometimes occasionally involved with person-to-person rescues that occurred with wrecked and stranded ships.
Lake Michigan's most treacherous body of water in the world because it is comparatively shallow and it runs north and south, so the north winds can really whip up the waves. We can get 60-mile-an-hour winds here very easily all the time. It can be quite rough out there.
Now, the Armistice Day storm was one of the most famous storms that occurred in the Great Lakes region. It occurred in 1940 when very high winds moved into this region from ranges further west. They drove wave heights up to 25 and 30 feet. There were winds in excess of 50 miles an hour, and quite a number of commercial vessels were lost in the course of that storm. The 1940 Armistice Day storm was one of the worst storms that ever struck the Great Lakes region. Well, there were virtually almost hurricane-force winds that occurred during the storm. There was another storm that preceded that in 1913 that took down a significant number of vessels as well. There were a number of women who served in the lighthouse service on the Great Lakes. Very often women were sort of second in command at lighthouses, that is, the wives of their husbands, and would take over duties in the husband's or the lightkeeper's absence.
There were several women keepers throughout the lighthouse history. Actually nationally known for her long length of service, Harriet Colfax, a very, very, very dedicated woman. And during her tenure here, the lighthouse, by most of the cargo ship captains and things, was referred to not as the Michigan City Port, the Michigan City anything. It was either I'm going into Old Faithful tomorrow, or I'm going to be at Miss Harriet's tomorrow. According to records, there was never a night that the light, when needed, was not lit. One small disagreement that she had with a friend who spent some time with her here, I don't know if she was ill or what, but the friend offered to light the light that night. And Harriet rather strongly said, nobody lights this light except me. Harriet received her appointments here in 1861, and she retired in 1904. At the time the light was moved to the pierhead, and she had already passed her 80th birthday. The pierhead light was in construction in the 1890s. It was finished so that the lens, the Fresnel lens from our building, could be installed in 1904. The lighthouse building was vacated in 1940, and June of 1973 was when it actually opened as a museum. There are 8 viewing rooms here, which are the rooms in which the keepers and assistants and so forth lived. The first floor is pretty much dedicated to things connected with Lake Michigan. We have a lot of records on shipwrecks. We also have a display about the Eastland, which was probably the worst shipwreck ever to take place in the Chicago harbor. It wasn't a local happening, but the Eastland was an excursion boat that had been leased along with several other ones to bring all of the employees of Western Electric Company along with their families to Michigan City to spend a day in Washington Park. There was a problem with the ballast, which was part of it, and an overcrowding for whatever reason on the upper deck, and the Eastland just simply turned on its side in the Chicago River. 750 people died. It probably is, other than the Titanic, of course, it's the worst of those kinds of accidents that have happened.
The state of Michigan has more shoreline than any state in the continental U.S., some 3,200 miles of shoreline. During the period of the 19th and early 20th centuries, more lighthouses were built on Michigan shores than in any other state in the country. There were over 115 lights built over time, scores of them that are still active and still functioning. Quite a number of them have been put out of service in the last 30 to 40 years, mostly in relation to the new types of navigational technologies that have developed. We had a very interesting lightkeeper who was stationed here at South Haven. His name was James S. Donahue. He was here as lightkeeper from 1874 to 1909 for a 35-year period. He was a classic maritime figure. He had lost his leg in the Civil War. He manned the station here diligently, received silver and gold medals for rescuing the lives of wrecked and stranded mariners. You know, a very significant maritime figure who served in the lighthouse service here. The Michigan Maritime Museum is an institution of Great Lakes research, preservation, and education focused on the region of Michigan. We have a series of exhibits that address the full spectrum of maritime traditions in Michigan, from the earliest period of Native American contact and the use of the dugout and birch bark canoe, on up into and through the era of the 1,000-foot freighters that ply the lakes today. We addressed traditions of the U.S. Life-Saving Service in the state, the lighthouse service, the shipbuilding industry that was practiced here, recreational boating and yachting, the very important industrialization of this region and the role that the maritime trades played, and a wide range of related subjects.
St. Joseph, Michigan has had 5 different lighthouses. The present lighthouse was built in 1907, 1908. We think that the inner light, some of the previous lighthouse was incorporated into the last one that we have now. It is unusual to have 2 lights, to have an inner light and an outer light. With the inner and the outer light, a ship out in the lake can line up on both of those and then know he's coming straight in. If they're one way or the other, then he knows he's either to the left or the right of the harbor. There's a catwalk on our lighthouses, which is unusual also. There aren't too many with the catwalks. These were used by the lighthouse keepers to go out there in the middle of the winter to service them, because they had to service them every single day. And even in more recent times, they had to go out there until things got automated to check, make sure the light bulbs worked and everything worked. And in the wintertime, there's no way else you could get out there. St. Joe Benton Harbor has always been, if not one of the major ports on Lake Michigan. Still a working port. We still have freighters coming in. There's a lot of pleasure crafts here that go in and out. Also, our area is known for the largest open-air cash-to-grower fruit market in the world at one point in time. This is a major food industry area, and it started very, very early.
We're from England, we're from the north part of England. You've got to realize that Michigan is nearly as big as England, the lake itself.
We just can't believe that the lake is 300 miles long and 100 miles wide.
Thereabouts.
We have lakes in England, you know, but nothing like the size.
So our heart is certainly here, isn't it, Vi, in this part of the world. And
Really.
every time we look at that big red, we have a lovely photograph of it at home, and that's one of the best and beautiful lighthouses I've ever seen.
Originally, the lighthouse in Grand Haven was on the beach, not too far away from where we're standing here. That was in 1839. In 1852, a fall storm destroyed that, and they put it on the bluff behind the beach. Then in 1905, they moved the light down to a new tower that had been put up on the end of the pier. That is the tower that we see out there today. Originally, in 1905, it was on the end of the pier, and then in 1907, they picked it up and moved it back to its present location. When they brought the light down from the bluff light position and put it out on the end of the pier, it was a great event for the city folks. The only problem was they hadn't let the captains of the ships know about it. So when two of the ships came in at night, they were still looking for the range lights that they were familiar with to enter the port, not knowing that the light had been shifted from the bluff out to the end of the pier. And had they not known the port, they would have run aground for sure. So you can imagine the captain's fury when he stepped ashore to find out what had happened. On the tops of all of these poles and all along the catwalk are replicas of a light that were on the top of the masts of the Escanaba, which was the white ship that came to Grand Haven in 1932, then went to war and was sunk in 1943. 1929 was a tragic year here for loss of lives. To begin with, July 4th of that year, 10 swimmers were lost at the state park. And then in the fall of that year, 2 ships out of this port were lost. First the Andaste, with all 25 people lost, and next the car ferry Milwaukee, which had left this port and had gone to Wisconsin and was trying to get back to Grand Haven, but was lost on the way, and 52 people were all hands were lost there. So that was the year of 29, and as I mentioned before, when the Escanaba arrived here, it was a result of those tragedies of 29 that brought the Escanaba here to Grand Haven in 1932. Surfing in the Great Lakes now is a fairly common thing, particularly on the eastern shore of the lake, the west side of Michigan, because we're on the side of the lake where the prevailing winds are. And when I started surfing here in 1955, I was the first one to ever have tried it. So there are a lot of fanatics now, and they'll even leave work to come out here when no one else will take off and go out into the surf just to have another ride.
Oh, we're nuts. We're nuts. We've been doing it for a long, long time.
During the fall storms, people will go out onto the pier, and even though the warning is don't go out, they do it and are swept off the pier, and periodically we lose someone into the channel or off into the lake, either way.
Our first lighthouse keeper had a unique story connected with him. His name was Captain William Robinson. Captain meaning that he was an established ship's captain from England, and had heard all the way from England because Muskegon County was once known as the lumber capital or queen of the world, so it had worldwide status, and decided to try his hand at a job working at one of the lumber camps. When he got here, realized that there was no light. The light wasn't built until 1875, and he came here in the late 1860s. So what he did is, on his own accord, he got a lantern. He placed it on the old river. So for close to 10 years, this guy, without pay, only in that he was a dedicated ship's captain prior, he did this every night. And then finally, he and several of the ship's captains drafted a letter to the federal government and said, indeed, we need a light here. So they did, and then when it was time to appoint who was to be the first lightkeeper, they said, well, Captain Robinson should be it, because basically he's been an unpaid lightkeeper for close to a decade. He moved in. He and his wife Sarah raised 11 children, so we were 13 people occupying only 4 bedrooms. His wife died when she was 58, and he lived to be 87. And apparently there was quite a love affair between the two of them, and decided to put all of his grief into his work. And that was kind of his therapy. He became a very dedicated lighthouse keeper, and he was determined to stay here for his entire life. He finagled his eldest grandson, Captain William Bush, same first name, to get the position so that he could stay at the lighthouse. He basically was staying here unbeknownst to the government. Well, as it turns out, the government found out that Captain Robinson was living here, gave him a deadline. You are to move out by this particular time period. He fell into a very deep, dark depression, stopped eating, just basically lost his health, and died the night before he was to move. So he never left the building. In 1959, they decommissioned the lighthouse, basically because there was no more commercial shipping. The Coast Guard then sold the building to our local township, and it's been running as a museum since 1970. We have a lot of artifacts from the U.S. Lighthouse Service and the Coast Guard. You'll see maritime artifacts that pretty much explain the days of the steamships. We have a lot of brass artifacts off the steamships. What we try to do is to chronicle the local activities along with the different items that were commonly used on some of the steamships.
I wouldn't change my life for anything, because that was so interesting, living in lighthouses in such variety. Of all the lighthouses we lived in, I liked Little Point Sabo the best, because this is where I came back after all of my travels. My mother left us. I think it was just too much for her to be isolated. And my father was my mother too. Well, on Mother's Day, I think of my father because he was such a good father. But he'd do everything for us, and we never lacked for anything. This Little Point Sabo Lighthouse was torn down in the 40s because it was discontinued. They didn't have any light keepers there anymore. And I just think too bad, because they were so well made. All oak flooring, it was beautiful. My stepsister and I had the bedroom on the 3rd floor. It was a big bedroom and had a big walk-in closet. And we used to put on plays for the rest of the family. But you could hear the waves roar up there. And that was so nice, to go to sleep with the waves roaring. To hear the waves lap up on the shore, gentle. It was really a nice way to go to sleep.
Little Sabo Point Lighthouse was built in 1873, finished actually in 1874. Cost about $37,000 to build it. Unbelievable, isn't it? Yeah. Little Point Sabo Lighthouse is the tallest working lighthouse on Lake Michigan, and it's 115 feet in height. And it's 5 feet thick at the base. Extending out into the lake 8 miles makes it still a useful tool for sailors to get some assistance. Because of being on the point, it's such a change in weather as boats, especially come from the south to the north, and as they come around the point, all of a sudden they get blasted with these huge waves that force them in toward shore. And it's so shallow off of Little Point Sabo that they just get into double trouble. There were 3 ships at one time in 1940 that went down. All hands were gone except the ones that hit Little Point Sable and beached on the 3rd sandbar. We have a ride that anyone can take. The ride takes you over the sand dunes on the shores of Lake Michigan and Silver Lake. It's almost a must for anyone touring through Michigan because it's an unusual thing to do. Look at the color of the water. Look at the clouds in the background. Oh my goodness. There's no other sand dune area in Michigan that begins to compare with this as far as looking like a Sahara. You can see that. It's 1.5 miles across between the lakes and 3.5 miles the length of the dunes. A drift like this on the left in front of us, that could come across and cover that road up in just a matter of a day, 1 day. So the drifts on the dunes can move quite rapidly. You know, 4 or 5 foot a year to actually fill Silver Lake in as it goes. Sounds like not a lot, but it takes a lot of sand to do that when it has to fill the lake in as it goes. Silver Lake's gonna be around for a while, and eventually they'll just call it Sliver Lake or something, you know. But it's such a unique lake. People come, I think, just to see the dune formation along the shoreline of it. This was one of the worst summers that we've had in a long, long time for hiking on foot on the dunes because it was so hot. These are all owned by the Michigan Department of Natural Resources, all the dunes now. They require us to have a particular trail and just use that trail. You'll see that there are little guideposts here and there along the way on the left side of the trail marking it. This is a live dune right here coming across with southwesterly winds to move it in the summertime, moving at about 6 to 8 foot per year, going right over whatever trees are in its way. It's almost all jack pine there, but there are some oak and juniper bushes and poplar trees. And you'll see some of them in the different condition that they're in because of the sand covering them up. The poplar grows so fast that it stays alive. All the rest are suffocated by the sand covering them up. But the poplar, you're looking at just 1/3 of one tree. What it does is to put out another root system. It's systemic. People come more every year, I think, along the coastline to vacation because there's different things for them to do and their interests have changed. I think there's a lot of people that want to learn about the history of the lighthouses, different things that Michigan has to offer.
Ludington, Michigan was a very busy and important town for lumbering back in the early 1840s. In 1914, they built a lighthouse on the North Breakwater. That lighthouse was built on a crib of timbers and rock. It was abused by the ice and severe winters, and they decided to build this steel pyramidal tower. That was built in 1924 on the same crib that was originally with the 1914 light. Recently, when the Corps of Engineers came and squared off the North Breakwater, they damaged the original crib, so we have about a 5-degree list on our 1924 pyramidal lighthouse.
This is Big Sable Lighthouse, which is located in the Ludington State Park. Visitors have to walk 1.5 miles down a sand dune road to reach the lighthouse. There used to be over 1,000-foot frontage from the tower out to the lake, and through erosion, the land has all disappeared. In fact, it wasn't too many years ago where the water had encroached upon the tower, and they thought they were going to lose the tower. So they've done some reconstruction here. They've brought in riprap, which is the large rocks, and the groins, which are the metal going out into the water, and it reduces the action of the waves so the soil doesn't get washed away. Open today is the tower, where the visitors are allowed to climb to the top and look out at the beautiful view of Lake Michigan. The tower is 106 feet tall, and there's approximately 130 steps to the top. So it is an active aid to navigation. The beacon is run off of electricity.
All I'm doing is covering the daylight control, which makes the light come on just like your street lights would. Uncover it and it goes back out, so it operates during the day or during the night and shuts off during the day. We give a class to a group of school teachers who teach Michigan history, and lighthouses are part of their history. So we show the equipment we're using, some of the old equipment we used, explain how it works so that they can pass that on to their students. Then the students have an idea of the operation of the lighthouse and the equipment that's in it.
A Frenchman by the name of Fresnel developed what was called the Fresnel light. And through a mirror system and a refraction of the light through these glorious bits of glasswork, they were able to take that wick and magnify it many, many times so it could be projected out onto the lake as a signal to the boaters.
They really are probably the most energy efficient item that has ever been invented. Augustin Fresnel came up with the invention in the 1830s and reversed the scientific world's ideas of what light did and did not do and how it could be changed and so forth. They're marvels of engineering. The Michigan City Light, which is a 5th order lens, is the smallest version of that lens manufactured, and it still had a visibility range on Lake Michigan using a candle as the light source. The light could be seen at roughly 13 miles distance. The largest Fresnel lens is from 9 to 12 feet in height, 10 to 12 feet in circumference. And I think the range is supposed to be about 30 to 35 miles.
Everything centers around the turn of the century for most of these lighthouses along the lake. Even though some were built prior to that, those that are on the ends of piers date back to the turn of the century. Those that are on land today date back into the 1800s.
The light station at Point Betsy has recently been discontinued. The residents and the cottages that are there or are available to Coast Guard personnel for R&R. The way they work it is the high ranks pay the most. Like if you're an officer, you would pay more for your cottage or the rent of your cottage than you would for the ordinary seaman. They use that. It's available on a 2-week basis throughout the year. When we had our Great Lakes Lighthouse Keepers Lake Michigan Conference, we drove over to Leland, which is a small fishing town. In fact, one area there is called Fish Town. It's very unique and very quaint. Well, we boarded a vessel there, and that vessel took us toward South Manitou Island. And on the way, we went by the North Manitou Shoal Light, and the purpose of that North Manitou Shoal Light was to guide ships through the narrow Manitou Passage rather than go out around the islands in Lake Michigan.
North Manitou Shoal was built in 1935, and that's still in operation. 4 men lived out there on the crib, but they've taken everything out of it and taken all the plaster out of them and then put ventilators in the bottom and the top, so it's just a skeleton there now, but the light is still in operation. I don't know what the ferry schedule is going out to South Manitou, but if you get a chance, you should go out there. It's really a nice trip.
It's supposed to be a lonely job as far as lighthouse keepers go. You hear all kinds of stories about it, but I think that this one would probably have been pretty comfortable. There was quite a settlement built up on the island from the passing freighters. They had quite a logging industry because of all the steamships. It's 117 steps up to the parapet, which is where we go outside. They're all big cast iron steps, very heavy. They were all laid one at a time and then used as scaffolding as the building was constructed. It's actually a freestanding staircase. It's not attached to the outside wall at any place.
Wow.
Yeah. I don't usually tell people that are afraid of heights.
Living in a lighthouse is like living in any other home, but there were certain places we weren't allowed to go. We weren't allowed to be up in the tower. We weren't allowed to go down in the fog signal. I used to light the light when I got to be a teenager. My father let me go up and light it for him. And if he was here alone, I'd go down and shovel coal into the old steam boilers for the foghorn to blow. I'd do that from 6 in the evening till 12 at night so he could get some rest, and he'd come down and relieve me. When I first came here, we had to get up early in the morning. It was dark, get the horses out and put the harness on them. And then we'd go 9 miles to school. And then we got down so far where you passed near the water, the driver of the horses, he'd go straight across the ice to Northport. The Grand Traverse Light is now a museum. What we're trying to do is preserve our heritage and show them what a lighthouse was and what it was for and the equipment in it and what you had to go through to keep it. This was a keeper's bedroom. This is pretty well set up the way it was when I left here in 1935. These are the timbers that go from the basement to the tower. And these were all hewn by hand with an adze. They're big old pine trees, that's what they are. This is my mother's furniture in here. This is our dining room, and over here is her dishes. In that cupboard, that's some of her dishes. The old telephone is the same. I put that back. The number on it is 10F23. Whenever that would ring, the girls always ran to listen.
Potbelly stove?
Yep, that's the original. That's the only heat they had in the building. That's the pump organ my mother got in 1899 as a wedding present from my father.
And this is your father?
Yep. He was born in 1872. Fact is, he was the only white boy going to school with the Indians, and he was very fluent in the language of the Chippewa and the Ottawa. When my father retired, he was offered Old Mission Point for $1, and he turned it down. He said he had enough of the lighthouses. I started working on this light in 1985 with a group from Northport, volunteers, and they asked me if I would be their caretaker and in charge of the building and grounds, which I accepted. I've been in here for 12 years now.
Governor Engler passed a bill when the Coast Guard are no longer in need of the use of the lighthouses, that they are to be preserved either by selling them for as low as $1 to an organization that can prove worthy of its continued care, which in the past, a lot of these lighthouses would be shut down and vacated, and that was what brought about their demise, because they would be severely vandalized in the location that they were. So what happened is Governor Engler finally addressed that issue and is now making a jurisdiction that when the Coast Guard passes these on, that if they are no longer being used, his sense is that they need to be lived in. They need to be occupied so that they're not vandalized.
The federal government is beginning to sell or try to pass along management of a number of lighthouses in the Great Lakes region to the general public or private nonprofit or organizations. These lights are just too expensive. The structures are too expensive for the government to maintain, and new navigational aids are making their maintenance not as necessary. In some cases, communities are taking over the maintenance of the lighthouses. In some cases, they are being owned and operated by private parties. But over time, I would assume that an even greater number of them will eventually be put out of service, but a number of them will continue to be maintained as navigational aids.
To get to Beaver Island, you board the Beaver Islander in Charlevoix, and you go through the channel out onto Lake Michigan. If you're lucky and it's a nice smooth ride, you can enjoy the lake. You pull into St. James Harbor, and there's a St. James Harbor light there at Beaver Island, but the residence has been taken down.
There are quite a number of areas of the lakes that have significant concentrations of shipwreck sites. There was quite a bit of commerce in the lakes over time, and their numbers exist anywhere from 3 to 6 to perhaps as high as 10,000 wrecks of commercial-sized vessels that occurred in the lakes over time. And these were vessels that were driven ashore. These were vessels that were wrecked offshore in the course of high winds and waves, sometimes driven onto shoals in the lakes region as well.
Main islands. There's Beaver Island, Hog Island, Garden Island, High, Trout, Whiskey, and Squaw. There is a lot of treacherous water out here. There's lots and lots of shoals. We just came through a spot right back there that's 6 foot on either side of us. And if you don't have the navigational equipment or not familiar with the waters, you can get in trouble pretty easy. You know, we've come over and pulled boats off of a lot of shoals.
As you leave Little Traverse Bay and head up to Mackinac Island, you go by several shoal lights there, and the reason is, of course, the waters get very shallow very quickly, and so those are there primarily to keep the boaters off the rocks. The keepers of the lights had to live right there in the lighthouses, because until 1918, everything was done with kerosene or any kind of oil, whale oil, but kerosene became very popular, and everything, all the lights were with a wick. So it was a flame, and the flame had to be magnified many, many times.
Well, lighthouses were built to mark harbor entrances and to mark obstructions out in the lake of shoals and such that ships might run aground on, dangerous areas that might not be evident to mariners. There were also lightships that were placed at various strategic locations to mark shoals and harbor entrances for navigational purposes.
Wagashanks, that was bombed. They used that as a target in World War II, The Wolverine used to go up there. She used to be the old aircraft carrier, and they trained pilots up out of Chicago, and then they'd run up to Wagashanks and bomb it.
Why did they do that?
Well, they didn't use it anymore. You got Gray's Reef and White Shoals took the place of Wagashanks. Same as Lansing Shoal took the place of Squaw Island over on just off of Beaver. The building is in pretty good shape yet. It's privately owned. And I think the vandals have been in it, so, but inside of the building, the woodwork is almost perfect yet.
What we do is we have personal watercraft, and we load them up for the day, and we pick a destination depending on the area and the winds and the tides and the waves, and that's what we've done today. We said Squaw Island's a good place to go, and that's why we're here. We were told about it by a friend. They said that we should go over and see it. It's a must-see. It was absolutely well worth it. This is just, yeah, I can't say enough about the structure and the architecture and the design of it. And then, of course, you have the history and the age and the condition and the fact that people lived here and maintained it. I can't imagine what it must be like in the fall and the spring when the weather was brutal and provisions were tough and supplies were difficult, and it took a special person, I would think, to maintain an outpost like this, as far out as it is. Get a certain reverence for what they went through to even build it. The fact that a lot of people haven't seen it, or ever will, is what makes this one so special. It's not something that you drive to. You have to pay a price to get here, and it's worth it when you get here. And the only way to know that is to do it. It's an adventure, and it's worth the trip. Yeah, I recommend anybody getting here.
Skilly-gilly, which is the name we use today. It's actually a French word that translates for all of us to skilly-gilly. That is one of the fabled shoal lights, of course, and there is a little island there. And of course that dates back, skilly-gilly, as you can imagine, during the fur trading days when the vessels were going back and forth between here and Mackinac Island, the sailing vessels. Skilly-gilly was a place they didn't want to venture onto.
Skilly-gilly is nothing but bugs and flies and seagulls and ducks and cormorants. And they bomb you when you go in there. But there was a house out there, and the boathouse, and they had their boat, and there was quarters out there for 3 people.
I once ventured to Skilly, and the black flies were just phenomenal there. And the problem being that some of these lighthouses, when you actually get to them, and here you have great hopes of photographing them. Well, Skilly was one of the many that I have on my list, and do not return unless it's off season and it's, you know, maybe there's even frost on the ground, when the insects are totally at bay. I was bitten so intensely by the bugs there that I got a few shots, and the shots didn't turn out.
Man, that's not the paint fading, right? That's bugs.
Oh my gosh. These gnats are unbelievable. Good thing they don't eat people. We'd be dead. I can feel these gnats in my shirt and in my ears.
So have you ever experienced this when you've been on a charter before?
No, never. Flies maybe, horse flies, but this is unbelievable.
Michigan History Magazine recently took a poll of some of its 75,000 readers, and they asked them what subjects are of the greatest importance to you, and they listed railroad history, Civil War history, maritime history, and a wide range of related subjects. And there were literally tens of thousands of people that responded to the poll, and 75% of the respondents picked maritime history as the subject of #1 interest. There are a number of reasons why the Lighthouse Service has captured the public attention. They're interested in the architecture of the buildings themselves, but most importantly, they're interested in life in the Lighthouse Service and the role of the lightkeeper and the very stoic attitude, diligent attitude that was projected in that service, and the very important role that the Lighthouse Service played in saving lives.
Old Mackinac Point got decommissioned when the bridge went up. That was around 1958. They had no need for the light because they had lights on the bridge, and they just head for the bridge and go under it.
I think there's a renewed interest in lighthouses because, well, when they were put on the stamps, I found quite an increase in volume of tourism after that. But you're starting to see more of an interest in going back to our roots. And of course, it's hard for us to conceive of a time when it was just ships and dirt roads that got us from one place to another and got goods from one place to another. So our maritime roots are now being re-examined.
We say there's a virus out there, and if you go in Lighthouse 1, you catch it, and then you're hooked. But they just seem to be a very, very popular thing. And there was a little bit of a romance, maybe, about actual people tending the lights. You know, they were faithful, hardworking, cleaning, polishing, making sure that that beacon was there for everybody's sake. The visitors who come in here many times, especially in the last few years, they're planning their vacations and simply are exploring old lighthouses. They're not all open to the public or anything, but they're fascinating places.